organization, and we're happy to have Gwen as part of our team. So everybody get familiar with her face. She'll be representing us from Centerpoint, and thanks, Gwen, for making the meeting.
Sure.
This morning is kind of our favorite, it's one of my favorite membership meetings we do every year. We've struck up a good friendship with KC Conway. He's got a lot of history with Colliers in particular, was their chief economist. He has a lot of insightful information. He's one of the only economists I've ever known that actually has got a good sense of humor. can tell the numbers with some, that are typically boring, with some impact on the things that we care about, which is the economic circumstances we find ourselves in from time to time, as well as the real estate market. He's an expert in all of those things. He's had 35 years of commercial real estate experience, 30 in the private sector, 5 with the Federal Reserve System. He at one point was the real estate advisor to Ben Bernanke back in 2005 to 2010. He's a director of research today and corporate engagement at the Alabama Center for Real Estate at Culver House College of Business. That's the University of Alabama. He was the chief and is the chief economist for CCIM Institute in collaboration with the relationship with ACRA since October 2017. As I said, he was chief economist for Colliers, and he was chief appraiser and senior market intelligence officer for SunTrust Bank from 2014 to 2017. That's about when we hooked up with him back then. And we saw him actually at a Colliers event and said, if you're going to fly in for that, you might as well make an extra stop out in Fort Bend County. And we've, since that time, we've kind of struck up a good relationship. He got robbed out of a dinner and a flight. I'm sure he was willing to give the dinner up to stay at home with his family. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Casey, and let you go. What I asked Casey to talk about today was more of a macro look at our national economy. He follows a lot of different forward-leaning documents, and things that we hear in the news all the time, the news likes to talk about, are not really the things he follows to get a fix on where the economy is and where it's going. And he obviously also has that real estate background. So I've asked him to talk about 3 things today: the national economy, COVID and the real estate market, and some introspective or perspective on the Houston market and the Houston region in general. So those are the 3 things. And then we'll have time for questions afterwards after we get through his document. So Casey, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Let me put the screen share on here, and we'll get at it. So everybody seeing it good? All right. So there's our cover slide. There's what I looked like 3 months ago before COVID. So now the hair is almost all gone, but it's getting thinner. So I'll have to add that to the resume. COVID survivor on that. Well, not fun. I don't recommend it. Let's see if I get this. There we go. There's my disclaimer, Jeff. So you guys are all protected. These are all my crazy ideas. So mayor and politicians are all okay. You can just point back to this. If you need anything, so Jeff, here's the ACRE website, and a lot of the content is posted here. I do a weekly insights. I did one today. I posted. It's called "It's a W." So forget this Nike swoosh fee recovery. Let's just hope it's a W and that we don't go to a U or L. But I'll make my case for there. Also, I put on there on the right a couple of other recent ones I did on the other L&T industry. So you guys know logistics and transportation, but there is another one called leisure and travel. And it's ugly and going to be worse than anything we've ever seen with any property type. So we're going to really have to figure that out in municipalities that have a lot of dependency on leisure and travel and hotel occupancy taxes. You got a problem ahead of yourself. So we'll talk a little bit, but those pieces go deeply into there. So there's where you can find all of that stuff. I just wanted to do a truth in I'm going to create a new economics club for economists called the most inaccurate group of economists. Because if you look at anybody's forecast in January, I think we missed the mark on everything for the year. But this is one I did the beginning of January, mid-January. It was right about the week that Trump put the travel restrictions on China. And I titled my outlook for the year called Picture Influences. So who cares whether the glass is half full or empty, whether the greatest recovery ever is going to go away? Let's just look at who controls the picture. So like Jeff, as you know, when we go out and we eat some good, Tex-Mex, I'm really missing the Tex-Mex because we don't have that in Georgia or Alabama. It's what's in the pitcher. And you always want to have a full pitcher and never want it to get empty. So whoever is controlling that pitcher really determines whether we're going to have a great meal or not. And so you can see the things that I really had on the radar at the beginning of the year, things like LIBOR transition. We kind of forgot about that. Still occurs end of next year, and there's no solution. We don't have that figured out. Maybe the Fed will just buy all of LIBOR product. Boeing, we knew that first little problem called the 737 MAX. They got a bigger problem now. This thing called ESG, environmental social governance. Forget the E now, it's all S. So the ESG movement's gone. And then look down in the lower left, I said, and sometimes we have these black swan events, and I really didn't know. I just thought coronavirus could be a bad flu for this season, but I had it in there. I had no idea what I was really, what or why I was putting in there and where it would go. But I do want you to know, this is the only economist I found that had coronavirus in January on their list of things that could happen. But I had no idea. I'll be honest, I had no idea how bad it could be. So that's my truth in kind of disclosure, my report card. So I always like to start with kind of having an opening perspective or reading recommendation. And as you know, Jeff, I was one of those kids that hated to go from kindergarten to first grade because they got rid of the picture books in first grade and we had to have all words. So I like books that have pictures. And this is one that I had lost, but the kids archived it for me for Father's Day, called Whatever Happened to Penny Candy. I strongly encourage you get it and read it. It really is kind of the economics that makes sense in a real simple way. And I think we all have got to do that because all of the metrics we're getting today, and I'll get into the jobs numbers in a minute, they all make no damn sense at all right now. And we can't do historical comparisons, and there's going to be new metrics we're going to look at that are going to be more revealing than other ones. My favorite chapter in the book, so if you're like me, I can maybe get to chapter 2 before I nod off to sleep, or I lose track of. There's no sports on TV anymore, so you got to watch like TV Land or something like that with Andy Griffin, and you fall asleep. But it's chapter 2, and the acronym for chapter 2 is 10 Staffle, and that stands for there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And I'm gonna next week in my briefing to the bank regulators, we're doing it by Zoom, but I've sent about 50 copies of this book to give out to the heads and the senior deputies at the FDIC and the Fed, because everything they're doing in the balance sheet explosion and calling Treasury to print money is this. There is no such thing as a free lunch, and we forget inflation comes from 2 sources. The first is commodity and asset prices when they rise, and we're not having that. And the other is currency inflation. And we forget from Latin American debt crises, Germany after World War I, that when you devalue your currency, we're a fiat currency, it means there's nothing valuing it. You can have tremendous inflation because your currency isn't worth a damn thing. And where we're going with the Fed is Texas is going to need to reinstate its original currency before we consolidate it to $1. So go back and dust off who's got the reserves on the original Texas currency. We may need it because the dollar may not be worth a damn thing in about 2 years. So this is my reading recommendation. All right, the question I keep getting, I finally put it into a great way. I'm 58. I'm an old guy. I love cars. I'm a car guy. So many of you may relate to the 1970s or so when we would go on family vacations, and that was before we, could afford air travel and had the infrastructure that we do today. We're used to. And we'd pile into the family station wagon with the phony wood paneling, and the kids would get into the car with the seats facing sideways, and that's why we got car sick, because we were looking out the car sideways. And mom and dad wouldn't tell us where we're going and when we're going to get there, so we would always ask, are we there yet? And when we got annoying, the first thing they did was roll down the tailgate window to let some carbon monoxide into the car, so hopefully we'd go to sleep for a while. And when that didn't work, then they'd give us like car bingo and hopefully have something there. But I'm going to kind of use this theme, are we there yet? And the answer you might figure out is no, and it's going to be a while. But I put a few things there, a few markers. On June 11th, we had our biggest plunge in the Dow, 1,800 points. And less than a week later, we got retail sales. Remember those? The record up 17%. We got retail sales this morning. They were up decent, 7.5%. But if you look at the real number year over year, or you look at what's selling, things like apparel's still down like 60, 70% year over year. But the market said, hey, that's great. Let's go have another record rally. And so now we're back in this thing where we're kind of realizing that the virus didn't go away with summer heat like it was thought. We don't have a vaccine yet. There's lots of theories on how close we are, but we still don't have it. I can tell you I'm not going to be one of the first 5 or 10 million people to get the vaccine. I'm going to wait and see how many people die and have complications from it before I get mine. So I really think it's next year before if we're really lucky, that we get a vaccine. So as you guys can see, you're in the bucket. You'll see the numbers in a minute. Arizona, Texas, Florida, record high cases. Do you have to shut back down again? Do we go back in our reopening status to phase 1? City of Atlanta just went back there last week. We're out of control here. And so the thing I'm looking at is the Challenger grade job cuts report. It's one of our best forward-looking indicators. We've had them January to May were the highest cuts since Challenger grade's ever been tracking, so far worse than what we ever experienced in the Great Recession, and probably the Depression too. But the thing I point out here is these job cuts are not in the BLS jobs report, because these employees are still receiving that. They haven't been fully cut, or they're receiving a benefit. Until those benefits run out, you're not eligible to file. So we literally have millions of job cuts that aren't in these job numbers yet. So I really encourage you to kind of keep that in mind. So let's start here. Are we there yet? And the numbers were worse this morning. We're getting to 13.5 million globally. The US is over at 3.5 million. And I just want to put these numbers in perspective. So, just what we've gone in the last 2 weeks in terms of the increase in cases was over 3 million cases. And to put this in perspective, on April 1, so we were a full 2-3 months into the outbreak, we didn't even have 1 million cases globally. And look at these numbers today. So about 10 days ago, the CDC came out and said, we're just going to tell you shelter in place isn't going to work. That genie's out of the bottle. The coronavirus is out of control. Let's just go for herd immunity. That is, take your 20% that are vulnerable, put them away somewhere in a self-storage unit, and the 80% of you go have a COVID party, get it, and then we'll all be good. But when the CDC has given up, they've said it's out of control, that shelter-in-place things aren't going to really work. It's going to be things like masks and being disciplined, and social behavior is going to be more the norm. So I put in there on the left there, the COVID-19 cases are connected to the economic reopening bone, which is connected to the stress in the CRE. And they're all interrelated, and they don't look good. We're the worst in the world, 25% of all the cases. So do you think anybody in the world is going to let us travel to Europe or Asia this summer? Do you think international air travel is going to return? So this is the good news for you guys in Texas with Southwest Airlines. Southwest is probably going to be the one airline that recovers the best and the fastest with domestic travel. And Delta and United and American are really toast. The earnings numbers from Delta were just frightening. I mean, was it 17,000 employees are going to be gone by the end of September? The CARES bill requires the airlines to keep all of their employees employed through September. After that, the airlines are probably all going to file bankruptcy. They're not going to take the government option. And they're going to use that to discharge every contract, from plane orders, gate contracts at airports, redo route structures, labor union contracts. It's the only path. So think about all of the ancillary ripple effects from the airlines doing that, and look at the numbers that are being touted. United has already sent its warn notices out to all its employees, which have to give them 60 days notice, saying you're probably going to be cut. So they've already sent those out right now. You can look at states down there in the lower right in the rankings. So New York and California, I've heard a number of conspiracies that, Trump really created this because he was trying to get the COVID virus most outbreaking in those blue states, New York and California and Illinois. But now you see that theory doesn't hold up, because now a lot of red states have risen up. What I want to point out is states like Florida and Texas and Georgia and North Carolina, Arizona, that weren't even in the top 10 in case outbreak 30 days ago. Look at where they are, and you guys know your numbers there. in Texas. Where we want to get is Hawaii on the left there. They've peaked, they've got rid of it, and they'll be fine until we all realize that we still have Delta frequent flyer miles. So I encourage you to use all your frequent flyer points to go travel somewhere before October 1st when the airlines file bankruptcy, because all of those point things are going away. So if you have the courage and want to travel, use your points before October 1. They're all going away. So that's my frequent flyer miles tip of the day rather than a stock tip. Is that okay, Jeff? All right, next slide. So this one on the jobs report, I put here the April numbers on the left and the May numbers on the right because it was such a shock at how it recovered. I called the April jobs numbers the Humpty Dumpty jobs report. You know, jobs had a great fall, and now it was up to the Fed and the CEOs to put Humpty jobs back together. And nobody got the May numbers right, and they shouldn't have. And I'm going to tell you why. So here's the June numbers. So I did this LinkedIn post, and if we're not connected, send me a LinkedIn. I give a lot of good stuff each week. I'll never tell you what I'm barbecuing or where I'm going on vacation. It'll really be relevant business information. So what we need to remember is in March when the CARES bill was passed, it was the first time ever that we allowed 1099 workers and sole proprietors to file for unemployment. So when the numbers skyrocketed in April, that was 20 million of population, sole proprietors, 1099 people that we had never allowed in. So the April numbers were all screwed up, and they were never included anything that we've ever done. So trying to compare April and June numbers to historic is ridiculous. It's not even the same apples to apples comparison. So then what happened in May? Well, if you know anybody that's ever filed for unemployment, you have to demonstrate and keep a log of how you've actively been looking for employment in the month. Well, in May, those sole proprietors and those 1099 workers weren't actively looking for a traditional job. They were looking for other contract assignments. They were trying to keep their little sole proprietor business going. So when the BLS asked them for their log of what they were looking for jobs, they didn't have one. So what did the BLS say? You're not in the real job. You're not in the workforce anymore. You're out of here. So they removed 9 million from the workforce in May. So when you think that we added 2.5 million jobs, no, we didn't. They took 9 million out. You put those 9 million back in, and you still lost 6.5, 7 million jobs. So the same happened in June. We're taking these people out. The BLS is got what they call a misclassifications problem. They don't know who's in or out. And when you even get an economist like Mark Zandi, who was in the Obama administration and whatnot, when he says that the jobs numbers are meaningless and you just can't rely on these, you know you got a real problem. So I put on the chart over there 2 graphics to put this in perspective. So do you remember the days when we would wonder whether we gained 200,000 or 300,000 jobs, or even during the Great Recession, oh my God, we lost 500,000 or 600,000 jobs. And now we're talking about there was 20 million in April, and then we just gained 4 million or 7 million jobs in a particular month. These charts show how ridiculous these numbers are, but we're not comparing the same population. So do not pay attention to the BLS jobs numbers. They have no clue as to what they're counting or how to reconcile these numbers. All right. So look at things like ADP or Paychex. Paychex doing the payroll processing for small businesses. ADP, the largest payroll processor in the country, or Challenger Gray on who's cutting jobs. Here's the other reason I don't think we're there and I don't pay attention to BLS numbers. So I put on the left here the United Airlines announcement. You look at what's happened with airline travel. Delta and American will be sending their quote warn notices out in the next, by the end of this month. You see the Challenger Gray job numbers. April and May were the highest numbers of job cuts on record going back to when they started in the early 90s. Up through May, we had over 1.4 million job cut counts. That number will double by the end of August. So we're looking at 3 million job cuts that aren't even in the BLS numbers. So this is why I worry a little bit more. Here's Delta's earnings from yesterday, and how bad it was. Southwest I put over there, and I put the note down there with the red arrow. Of all the airlines, Southwest will do best and will have the best return and recovery. So even though their CEO says airline travel needs to triple for them to make it not have massive layoffs, the domestic travel is going to come back first. So our travel is going to be first driving, then it's going to be domestic, and it may not be international for 2 or 3 years. When Delta has parked over 700 planes and they're going to cut 17,000 from the workforce, These are mind-boggling numbers that we've never experienced that have ripple effects. Look at, the rental car industry and everything around an airport and the vendors. And for cities and municipalities at the state level, we really need to start to be concerned about our municipal bond debt. How are we going to support our bond debt on our airports or our schools when you don't have the revenue structure, or if you're highly dependent on sales and property tax instead of income tax? This is where the rubber hits the road, and you need to be thinking now, and don't look for a lot of help from the Fed, which I'll get to in a minute. All right, so of all the things to look at, I'm going to tell you, if you just look at these 4 metrics, Jeff, this will tell you when to get back in the market. You good with that? So my number 1 metric recommendation that nobody was even looking at, including me a year ago, was the TSA passenger count. So every day, TSA has a daily passenger count. Here's what it looks like. And you can go on their website, and they'll show you how many people are flying through all the airports. And we were, 2.3 to 2.7 million passengers a day going into March, and it collapsed in April to just 85,000. Now, here's the good news. Look at the recovery we've had. We're back to 600,000-700,000 people a day in really the first month of reopening states, the first 8 weeks. But now if we got to go back and shelter down, everybody's afraid to fly, I'm afraid these numbers come back. The other thing that's being masked in these numbers is the other half. We need to get back to at least 1.5 million. That's the business traveler. I used to do 20 flights a month, and I'm doing 0. In my 35-year career, I've never had 2 weeks where I didn't travel, and I've now had over almost 4 months where I've not traveled. I don't know what to do, and my millennial daughters and my wife are beside themselves because I ask too many questions being at home so much. So TSA passenger count, this will tell us the trajectory of any recovery. It'll tell us whether when we get a vaccine, you could see this number skyrocket. So if you want to know really where the economy is taking ground, if we get back to 1.5 million passengers flying and the business traveler come back, we're good to go, get back in the market. Number 2 is LTSS. These are loans transferred to special servicers. The data company in the CMBS world, TREP, T-R-E-P-P, tracks this. I put the link there. And the numbers are frightening if you're looking at lodging. The numbers are now, this is the canary in the coal mine. When a loan gets transferred to special servicer, that's before workout foreclosure. So this tells you what's coming. We have no equivalent to it in the banks, because even though we have bank stress tests and we had more than a decade past Dodd-Frank, we still don't have transparency in the data in the banks. So it's absolutely atrocious, but this is the canary in the coal mine. This is the permanent debt. You can see on industrial multifamily, not bad at all, less than 2%. They're gonna do okay. The third one is CRE transaction activity. We've seen it start to really lock up. In fact, in May, there were a total of only 10 hotel transactions nationwide. That was a record low. Real Capital Analytics tracks this on every MSA in the country. And the prior low was in July of 2009 or 12, which was 21. So Real Capital Analytics, I'll show you in a minute here. I'll go there. So there's the TSA passenger count. Here's the TREP data on loan servicing. So you can see on the lower left, the loans transferred to special servicing, and you can see the 16% number on lodging, but really low on industrial multifamily. Here's their delinquency numbers. So you can see industrial performing the best, multifamily, and even office, not so bad. Office, everybody's going to pay their long-term office rents, and then they're going to all roll out of this, and we're all going to be working at home, or we're going to have much reduced space. So the office problem will come 2 or 3 years from now. Look at retail, 18% delinquent. These are, the market doesn't work. It's, you guys know, like in energy pricing, it's not what determines price is that last 1 million barrels of capacity. If you have 1 million too much, the price can drop $10, $20 a barrel. If you have 1 million too low, it can go up $20 a barrel. That's the same thing that's happening kind of here in these delinquency numbers. If you go to above 10% into 20 and 30% numbers, this is what really destroys CMBS. So there's the links in the data there. Here's a piece that's very different that'll give you, all right, note this down, Jeff. This is one of my happy glass half full ideas in the presentation. This is very different from 2009. Who holds the debt in commercial real estate? So in 2009, when I was at the Fed, about 75% of all the debt, the commercial real estate debt, was held by banks and CMBS. And when they locked up and CMBS shut down and the banks wouldn't trade, we had a liquidity crisis that spilled over into commercial real estate, and we all know the story. This time round, one of the few regulatory interventions that worked was in concentration. They didn't let any one property type overwhelm in one debt source, except for one example. See the red arrow over there? Government agencies, Freddie, Fannie, HUD, the FHFA, they own 93% of all multifamily loans in the country. So is it any wonder that the Fed intervened first, forbearance and loan forbearance for property owners? The Fed and the government, FHFA, which is still in conservatorship, is going to make sure that multifamily comes out okay. They can't afford to not have it. They own almost all of the multifamily debt in the entire country. But look at hotel, the black circle, black oval, and the light orange on the right. There is no one debt source, whether it's CMBS, national banks, regional banks, life insurance companies, that really has more than about 10 to high teen% of the hotel debt. Here's the good news there. That limitation means that probably every one of these debt sources has bandwidth to work out their hotel problems. Hotels are not going to collapse any one debt source. It's spread very evenly across. So that's very different than 2009. That's one of the most hopeful pieces I can give you out of this whole presentation. Here's the Real Capital Analytics data, which I recommend over CoStar. But CoStar even showed there's been a massive, almost 25% decline in transaction activity. Here's this chart from Real Capital Analytics. Look at the collapse in transaction activity. And it's not so bad in industrial. It's really bad in hotel, retail, and multifamily and industrial still transacting. So we've never seen this kind of collapse in transaction activity. And so ask yourselves, for your property assessors, and you're trying to put tax assessments on assets, very important in Texas. How do you determine the value of property where there's no transactions? And what the Real Capital Analytics folks said is, my good friend Jim Costello, with regards to hotel, he said he's never seen a period with this kind of illiquidity for a property type ever in terms of hotel. So how do we determine value? How do you transact? How do you move those things forward? And that's why the Fed's intervening so much in the market, is we can't get counter market prices on assets. And so the Fed's going in trying to set the market price and determine market price. So we don't have a market value anymore. We have a Fed value. All right. Here's another piece of good news. I'm only giving you 3, Jeff. So this is number 2. So NAIOP, many of you are familiar with NAIOP, the National Association of Industrial and Office Property folks. They just completed a survey, and they, among all their members, and they looked at what's happening both in how long you expect the thing to last. The consensus is another 6 to 12 months. The second is a year to 18 months. And all that assumes probably a vacancy. But look at the blue bar here for each of these in terms of building acquisitions. We just saw in the last month the best month for industrial, office, and multifamily in transactions. So there still is liquidity by life companies, some banks. So this is encouraging. If NAIOP's correct, they could be on the leading edge of maybe something turning around for Real Capital Analytics and others. I mentioned the challenge on valuing. So I wrote this piece of, I guess a few weeks ago, on valuing during a period of material change. Material change is how the regulators, the bank regulators, describe what we're going through. You guys can remember the BP oil crisis and the impact in the Gulf. That was a big one. The oil patch days was a period of material change. And appraisers in a lot of our industry have gone brain dead that if they don't have transactions, they don't know how to value. So I've archived a tool I got introduced to early in my career 30-something years ago at Equitable during the oil patch days. We're in Denver, and you guys know in Houston, there were no transactions. So how do you value when the market's locked up? So we created early in DCF, kind of era, a market correction factor. So we said, for example, in Denver, the market's going to be terrible for 2 years, and then something wonderful will happen, like they'll build a new airport, and the market will come back. And so we showed everything bad for 2 years, and we showed it recovered, and we only lost 50 to 60% of the value of the asset rather than 70 or 80%. 2 years later, we found out, well, that was wrong. We got to do it another 2 years. We kept doing that for 4 cycles, and it was basically found out it took 8 years for Denver to recover. But we can use these market correction factors right now in the absence of comparables to figure out values. And the best source for the input to these cash flows is corporate earnings. So even though 80% of the S&P are not giving forward guidance, they sure as hell are giving you forward guidance through their behavior. They're telling you what they're doing in CapEx and layoffs and acquisitions. So look at, for example, a Prologis, where I'm on the board of directors for a public REIT, an industrial REIT known as Monmouth, where we're one of the primary landlords for FedEx. Half of our 120 building portfolio is FedEx leased assets. And we've had 99% rent collections all through COVID. And we're giving you really good guidance as to what's happening, and we're not having to give free rent, and we're getting collections. Those are your input items to help you. So look at market correction factors in DCFs as an alternative to cash flows, and look to corporate earnings for companies that are relative to that property type to help you with those input items. I also will do at the end of Q2 here, I did it in Q1, I track all the earnings reports, and I'm looking for what they're telling me that's really relevant, because I don't care if they ever give financial ratios again. I'm looking at all their behavior issues. So this is a link to the one I did on Q1. Got both the YouTube and the slides are there. I did it with CCIM Global President Eddie Blanton at the end of May, and I'll do another one. I'll send that to you, Jeff. If you guys want to do another one, I'll be glad to do that for you guys. And we can focus even on just the Texas economy companies. All right. So one of the big takeaways out of that, I'll just have one slide I'll share with you here, is the red arrow down there. Everything we knew about industries and commercial real estate, those ratios, they're all dead. We're going to reinvent them. We're going to have to reprice everything. Density ratios, occupancy restrictions, when hotels can only occupy at 50%, restaurants at 60%. It's going to change how we price everything, how we value the stock, how we value the company, how we value the real estate. And in the middle there, I'll give you one of the nuggets I picked up out of the recent earnings, the Container Store. So they had to close half of their 100 stores, and their CEO at the end of Q1 said the stores that were reopening, and if we survive bankruptcy and don't go through bankruptcy, what we're going to determine in terms of where we open stores is stores that physically can accommodate click it and pick up. So if they're in line in a center and they don't have drive-up lanes and they can't block the parking, they're not going to lease that store. And we're already seeing this with grocery stores where they're petitioning. Here's one that may come up in Fort Bend County. You're going to see grocery stores come in and ask to eliminate as much as 25% of their parking in a zoning variance. And the reason is now 30% of their sales are online, or that people do click it and pick up. And they need safe drive-through lanes like a drive-through at a fast food restaurant. So, but that violates their zoning ordinance. They won't have the right parking density ratio. So I'm working with grocers right now to go into counties, petition for a zoning variance to reduce their parking to accommodate now new click it and pick up drive-through lanes, kind of the serpentine type stuff we were put through TSA at the airport. So think about these. Don't react initially and say, no, you're in violation of your parking ordinance. Think about its safety, its efficiency, it supports that grocer, it supports that business. These are things these are the nuggets I'm pulling out of these earnings that are telling us where we're going to go. All right. I just published a week ago, preparing for Q2 earnings season, what to expect. My favorite quote there is on the left, that we basically have, this is for the stock market, Jeff. We have a $10 trillion rally that hinges on earnings that nobody has a clue about. Nobody knows what's going on. The companies aren't transparent. We got to look at their behavior. And I think that's going to play out here as we get further through, we get past the bank earnings. If you're a money center bank and you have investment banking and trading activity, you're doing great. If you're a regional and you're tied to consumer loans and credit card or commercial real estate, you're toast. The amount of reserves that banks have had to add in the first and second quarter compared to a year ago is 7 times what they were reserving a year ago. That's all their earnings. So if you look at their earnings per share, their reserves and their allowance for expected loan losses are basically all of their earnings per share when you get into these regional banks or whatnot. So you can read that. I give you at the bottom there my 5 areas where I think there's big disconnects to focus on. So things like looking at the transportation metrics, look at the economic intervention by the Fed, because they're determining the winners and losers in this whole process. So you can read this piece. So let's talk a little bit about the Texas economy. I want to thank my good friends at Colliers there in Houston, Lisa Bridges, Chrissy Nolan, Pat Duffy. So they shared with me the most update stuff. They have a great periodic market insights report. So it's almost as good as the Greater Houston Partnership. Not quite as good, but it's really good. So here's their latest numbers. So you can look at unemployment, look at the US, Texas, and Houston. And remember, these are the U3 equivalent. It's not the total numbers. Our real U6 total employment add about 500 basis points to each of these numbers. In the US, we're at a real unemployment rate of over 18%. Texas, you're in the high teens. In Houston, your real number is closer to the high teens when you factor all that are not in the number. You can see the numbers in the lower left there. Houston's lost, this is through May, I believe, 250,000 jobs. Texas, almost 1 million jobs. These are huge numbers. Remember the days when just worrying about Hurricane Harvey and recovery was your biggest issue? God, that was nothing compared to this situation. So I'll tell you, Jeff, and your political leaders, Houston needs a new moniker for economic development. And it is, you are the most battle-tested, come back from whatever you can throw at it, city in America. Because you look at how you guys take issues and stand right back up. There's not another city in the world that could have handled Harvey like you guys did, that can work through this type of COVID issue, keep your industries, the energy industry, everything. So I think you all need a new moniker. I'm impressed. I think that's, you know, something to think about. All right, so here's your Greater Houston Partnership. So a couple of things I thought were interesting I pulled out of their latest report. So on the left there, you'll see the history of recessions, which is also in my current weekly insight today. But notice that the National Bureau of Economic Research, they're charged by the government and Congress to determine when we come in and out of recessions. And here's the history of them. And they generally have followed a protocol that when you have 2 consecutive quarters of economic GDP contraction, you're in a recession. Well, we've had one. First quarter, minus 5%. We don't even have a guess yet on second quarter numbers. We all know it's going to be bad. And they've already determined we're in a recession. It's the first time ever the NBER has put us in a recession with only 1 quarter GDP data. So you think I'm wrong on a W and that it's a V or a Nike swoosh? Why in the world would the NBER do something they've never done in the history of their research and put us into a recession with just 1 quarter data? You can see the energy numbers. It's going to be volatile. You guys know what's going on. We got Russia and Saudi Arabia and the U.S. in a price battle. Russia and Saudi Arabia want to put the U.S. energy independence out of business. If you think of an industry that the Fed should be intervening and supporting, and Congress, it should be our energy industry. The one element, the underpinning for our entire recent recovery that we went through post-2009 was we became energy independent. Thank you, Texas. Thank you, the oil patch states. And we're throwing them to the wolves. We're going to see energy be all over the place. We can see it get up to 60. We can see it pull back to 25. All these production cuts, the minute they see somebody else start producing in any kind of recovery, they're all going to turn on the spigots and we'll see energy prices go back. So it's going to be very, very volatile. And then you can see the Houston employment numbers and graph, unemployment on the right. This is another piece that I liked out of them. They've got, you guys are probably familiar with the barometer, their Houston Business Barometer in week 14. And I thought this was revealing because if you think that we're going to have a V recovery, you sure wouldn't see these kind of comments. Only 7.6% of all companies in the Houston area have reopened completely. That ain't getting to a V. 45% report they didn't close at all. So those are ones that are Zoom or banks or those of us that could work remote. 65% of companies say they never furloughed or laid off employees, while just 1% say they've recalled all their employees. So you got 1% bringing them back. 54% say that they receive paycheck protection. So compliments to Texas and Houston. You guys actually figured out how to access the PPP program for your small businesses where others couldn't figure out how to do it. So that's one of the better ratios of all MSAs in the country. And it speaks to your economic development, political, and particularly your community banks rather than your large banks. You have many, many more community banks that do a really good job. When they asked when they expected to resume normal operations, nearly half of all your respondents at the bottom said it'll take at least 3 months or longer, up from 28%. So you know what's going on. You're slipping backwards, not forwards here. And this is your data. This is your Houston Partnership. They do a great job. So this concerns me. Also from the Colliers folks, this is good. This is their latest industrial data. They've got they've got a Seaports report coming out in the next week, which will be very good. My only criticism is, can we get them to cover Port Freeport, for God's sake? It's probably the most important story in the Houston area. that is one of your most valuable assets, and nobody covers it. So I'm getting ready to do a new logistics and ports report this fall, and we're going to put it in there and cover it up. It's one of your best stories, very important to you guys, particularly in Fort Bend and Sugar Land. So you can see what's happened to oil rig counts and all of that type stuff here. You can look at down below building permit activity. So you can see what's happened year over year change. Residential's down 36%. So when you think of even after recovery from Harvey, you still don't have those numbers. It's still hard for builders to get things done. There's supply chain disruptions. The banks are trying to lend, but the Fed's making it very difficult with the bank stress test saying you can't pay a dividend. And you look at non-residential down year to date over 24%. So these are concerning numbers. This is an important part of your economy. So thank you, Colliers and Lisa Bridges and Chrissy Nolan and Pat Duffy for sharing this. This is their latest data on the industrial market. So you see a little bit of uptick in vacancy rate on industrial. Don't worry about it. Go down to the third line item, deliveries. You had 9.8, almost 10 million square feet of deliveries in the first quarter when this thing broke out. Not everybody could get in, get moved in and whatnot. That increase in vacancy all was from deliveries. A lot of that stuff was pre-leased. It just was under non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements. So I think you're going to see that number drop back into the 6% range here in the second half of the year. Look what's happening in asking rents. Vacancy and absorption couldn't be a problem if you got this kind of growth in asking rents across the board. And look at those absorption numbers already in the second quarter. So between first and second quarter, you had almost 6 million square feet of net absorption. That's 2/3 of all the deliveries. So not a problem. Don't worry about industrial. All right. With all that I just said here, I'm going to give you one tool. This is a tool I used at the New York Fed 2009 and 10 when Bernanke wanted to know how bad it was going to get for commercial real estate. How much TARP money should they put in the banks? And so I laid out for commercial real estate and I said two things influence its value. On the top line is cap rates and on the left it's NOI. So if you remember back to 2008, 2009, cap rates sheared up 200 basis points in about 6 quarters because we had a liquidity lockup. There was no debt. So it was only high, very expensive equity. We're not going to have that this time. The Feds put so much money in the system, they took rates to 0%. Cap rates are not going to move and will probably compress on industrial and maybe even multifamily. So that increase in that cap rate wiped out 25% of the value up front. And then over the next 3 years, when we saw vacancy rise and rents drop, we lost another 20%. So in the lower right corner there, that circle, that's what happened over a 3-year period. We lost about 40% of the value. I see that we're going to probably lose overall nationwide, all property types, somewhere between 20 and 25% over about a 2 to 3 year period. A lot less in multifamily industrial, maybe only 5 to 10%, and really bad in hotel and retail, 50 to 70%. So not as bad because the form of the Fed's intervention is so great, we're not going to see the cap rate impact this time around. That's a really, there's another, this is my third positive point for you, Jeff. All right. I want to give you a tool. I want to go through a couple of the property types. And I want to give you a visual. This is the best graphic I've seen that you can apply to every property type. You could also apply this to local government. So your local leaders and economic development leaders, and ask the question, where does the dollar of rent or where does the dollar of tax collections go? And in property, and this one on multifamily by the National Apartment Association, the property owner gets the last piece of the dollar. First goes to servicing the debt, then all the operating expenses, the property taxes, all the way down the line. And what's going to happen because of COVID? We have rent forbearance in multifamily, which means loan forbearance, which means I'm going to defer my debt. My LTV is going to go up. I'm going to owe more on the debt. What's going to happen to operating expenses? I'm going to spend more on cleaning and maintenance. My turnover costs are going up. Jeff, I just met with a group, two or three different groups that own over 100,000 apartment units across the country in different projects. And they said they cannot lease a new apartment or an existing apartment today unless they replace the carpet because everybody believes COVID lurks in the carpet. So think of that tenant turnover cost. If now every time you turn over the place every year, 18 months, whatever, you can't get 3-4 years of life out of the carpet, it's only one tenant turn. That's about a $2,000 increase. So these are all the things that are going to impact it. In terms of multifamily, on the right side there, workforce multifamily is going to do a lot better than student housing. The student housing markets are going to be awful. So look at your college towns when the president declared states of emergency, he triggered act of God clauses in leases, and all of those all of those all those tenants were allowed to break their leases. I had 2 daughters in college, one in grad school in Florida and one in Alabama, and we were able to terminate those. We were able to terminate those leases rather than go all the way to August. Those haven't played out. Universities have had to rebate housing numbers across the board. Hold on, Kathleen.
Yeah.
The key is in the car panel door. If you need a minute. Sorry. But one of the fun things about being home, disruptions, and I blocked everybody in the driveway last night because I got home at 1 a.m. Sorry about that. So student housing is going to be a lot worse. We have 138 college towns that play NCAA Division I athletics, and what's happened in their housing is just awful. If you're a city in Texas, look at your college towns. We're going to face more Chapter 9 municipal city bankruptcies than we've ever faced in this country. The Fed is not providing any support. The CARES bill didn't provide support for any city less than 500,000 in population, and they're facing huge problems with the revenue declines to service their bonds, school bonds, municipal bonds, you name it. So I'm really kind of worried about that piece. Here's the other one why I think we face a W. Sorry, go back here. We can't function without intervention and support. So the FHFA, everybody that was on rent forbearance programs was scheduled to have those forbearance programs end, those rent forbearance end in July. And they realized the problems and the mass evictions that would come. So FHFA just extended that another 3 months. Think about mortgage forbearance. Those are 6 to 12-month programs. We have 23% of all American households that either rent or own a home that are in some form of rent or mortgage forbearance right now. Think of that, 1 in 4. So if you look at your neighbor across the street and to your right and left, 1 of the 4 of you can't make your mortgage payment. And it has nothing to do with whether you're low income or middle income. This cuts across every industry, every demographic. It's a real problem. So we can't function without this form of intervention in the Fed. So until we can stand on our own 2 feet, I don't think we're going to be able to look at a recovery. So this is a piece I wrote on Monday, tying into that, called The Housing Quartile Not Doing So Well, and that's this 23%. We've never, these are numbers that are double what we experienced in the housing crisis, when 1 in 4, when 8% are in rent forbearance, 8% are in mortgage delinquency, and these numbers are doubling every 60 to 90 days. You can't have 1/4 of your housing and household population in this kind of distress and expect to have a healthy housing market. It's those upper quartiles where people are leaving New York and inner city New Jersey, and they're going to suburbs or other cities. I have over 100 Wall Street diehard New York loving professionals that have all already left New York, and they've moved to North Carolina, they moved to Florida, they've moved to Tennessee. They're gone. They're never coming back. And we don't even have those numbers in yet. So this is a really important piece that you might want to read. I want to spend a little bit of time on hotel, because hospitality is very important to the Texas economy. It's very important to you in Houston, convention business, business travel, all of that type stuff. And so this is a piece I wrote at the end of May. I called it The Other L&T Industry. And you look at these numbers, some of them that I've gone over. Here's the quote in the red arrow from Jim Costello at Real Capital Analytics. We have never seen this level of illiquidity in the hotel market. It is effectively a frozen marketplace. So when you're looking at your hotel assets and you're looking at your leisure and travel, and it's not just hotels, it's your convention center and the bond debt that you may have. It's your venues, whether you have concerts or music, and you've got great stuff there in Sugar Land. All of these things, you're not booking things, you're not getting revenue, and there's debt and cost to service those. And so all of those things are part of this L&T, and I think this is unprecedented for any property type that we've ever seen. The other thing is, at the end of last quarter, I was able to meet with and talk with a lot of the major hotel CEOs after their earnings calls, like at Marriott and Hilton. And these are some of the things they revealed in stuff. And they said, look, in our new hotels, they're going to be less dense hotels. We're going back to the future, and we're going to exterior entries. So one of the hotel property types that's doing really well is extended stay. Their exterior entry, they have their own kitchen, they can get their own food at the nearby grocery store. They're doing very well. Contactless everything. Jeff, in a year when we get together again and I have to check into one of the hotels there, what's the one across from the lake? Yeah, the Hyatt, great property. There's not going to be a check-in counter. There's not going to be a drive-up. Everything's contactless. I recently stayed in one hotel I got there, everything was check-in by my app. There was one person to check in that didn't touch anything, that just directed me to what I didn't have on my app. I went up the elevator. I got in the elevator, and there's 4 circles in the elevator. Only 4 people were allowed in the elevator, and you stand in the corners. And if more than that get on, an alarm goes off, a sensor, and the elevator won't operate until only 4 people are on the elevator. When I got off the elevator and got to my room, it was seal wrapped, and I had to break the seal. My phone unlocked the door. I didn't have to touch the handle. I went in, the beds weren't made and the linens weren't out in the bathroom. There was a package with all of the linens sealed, and I had to make the bed and put my linens out so I knew nobody had touched it. This is a new reality. These are new costs and whatnot. And the other one that concerns me is the last one here. How do hotels and restaurants function economically when they have occupancy restrictions that limit them to 50 to 60% occupancy and revenue? And what I want you to be aware of, because I'm already preparing to be an expert witness in several test cases at major cities around the country, is major hoteliers and L&T industries and franchise restaurants are preparing major lawsuits against test pilot cities, let's say like maybe in Orlando, and they come in and say, your occupancy restrictions are a form of eminent domain. I can't spell eminent anymore. I thought I was in Alabama. You have to use all A's. That's Alabama spelling for eminent. But anyway, it's a form of eminent domain. It's a taking without compensation. And this is what's going to knock local governments back on their heels to quit telling us how we can operate our real estate. As a business, I absorb the liability. I have no liability shield insurance or anything from the government. I'm taking the risk. And if I can figure out how to manage my hotel or my restaurant in a safe way, if I do it in a reckless way and someone gets COVID and they sue me out of business, that's my business risk. That's called capitalism. But this is where it's going to end up, is all these occupancy restrictions are going to end up getting repealed when there's a test case or two where these occupancy restrictions are a form of eminent domain. And it's coming, and it will prevail. So retail, think about what we're buying. So this is a great graphic by Visual Capitalists. If you guys want a great resource to follow, they do such a wonderful job of visualizing data. This is one of what we've been spending money on, what we've not been. And I've got a note there on Weight Watchers to the right. And the reason I put that here is I thought, yeah, do I really need to listen to Weight Watchers on an earnings call? And I thought, I'm getting fat. I'm a diabetic. I'm eating more at home. I'm not exercising like I should. So I listened to it, and their CEO revealed something incredible for experiential retail and gyms. And what she said was, before COVID, 75% of their customer interactions were face-to-face in a shopping center or a little office building. And within 60 days, they had pivoted to all Zoom and virtual. And they saw subscribership go up to record levels in their highest customer satisfaction ratings. And the CEO concluded at the end of Q1 earnings with, you know what, maybe we don't need real estate anymore. And I thought, oh my God, think of all the experiential uses either in retail or office or gyms that can come to the same conclusion. And I started thinking about it a little bit more, and I was talking to my wife about it, and she revealed, hey, I do Zumba now. She pays the same amount. Her Zumba instructor has abandoned her month-to-month lease, and so she pays the same monthly fee. She gets on the computer, and they all are on the screen, and they all do their Zumba and support each other and whatnot, and she's happy as a clam, and she didn't have to go anywhere. She didn't have to dress up. She can go take a shower in her own bathroom afterwards. She couldn't be happier. So that's one takeaway. It's why I look at these earnings. This is one very important for you guys to take to heart. You're not as bad as, say, Louisiana or Washington State or other places, but you're one of the darker shaded greens. It's the states that are most dependent on retail sales tax. So you guys are facing having more shutdowns and going back to phase 1. So when you shut these businesses down and they can't sell and you can't collect sales taxes, you're screwed on your revenue model. You don't have an income tax. You have higher property taxes. You have higher sales taxes. Louisiana, Nevada, and Tennessee have the highest dependency on retail sales as a form of their overall state revenue. Eventually, the elected leaders are going to realize they have this problem. So if they don't get sued for eminent domain, they're going to eventually look at these numbers and say, oh my God, we got to get sales tax revenue going. So again, this is one from the Tax Foundation. It's another one is as good as Visual Capitalists. I encourage you to look at it. They really help you as your elected and political leaders look at these issues. They're really stratifying it and showing where you are. Great information. All right, my favorite topic. This is my last good point. So I guess I have 4 instead of 3. So logistics. So just like after the financial crisis, we had CMBS, we got CMBS 2.0 to fix all that was broken on permanent securitization debt in real estate finance. I'm forecasting we're going to have logistics 2.0. I'm going to be writing that paper, hopefully published by the end of the year. You see the one I did a year and a half ago on the left, logistics infrastructure. We highlighted Port Freeport very prominently in there, Jeff. We'll have some more things. But logistics is going to go through a whole new evolution here. And here's one of the big ones. It's amazing. Not one of the major real estate brokerages have picked up on this in any of their port and industrial stuff yet. And that is Port Laredo surpassed LA as the busiest container port in North America in February, so before the full outbreak. And what's going to happen is we see the reshoring of manufacturing from Asia. It's not all going to come to the United States. It's going to be in North America. A lot of it's going to be in Mexico because they have a less onerous approval process to build a factory or to deal with an EPA. And we're going to see all of those components like we do in autos today move north-south. So we're going to see less north-south movement of goods and logistics and supply than west to east coast. And you guys are right in the middle of it. And this is where Port Freeport becomes so critical, because the Houston port is so connected with chemical and petro and oil and energy, there isn't the bandwidth for the container stuff potential. That's at Port Freeport. And if you guys can't, at the overall state level and the Port Authority and everybody else, get on that page and realize that Port Freeport is accretive to a logistics and supply chain in Texas and not detrimental to Houston, you're going to lose out. I'll tell you, you're going to lose out to Port of Mobile. So Port of Mobile, while the COVID's been going on, we attracted Walmart. Walmart's got their new facility open. That's their redundant supply chain from Asia, backing up Savannah, the Port of Savannah. By the end of 2021, 2022, Walmart will be bringing in almost 3 million containers a year into Port of Mobile with a whole new terminal facility done. That will put it surpassing Port of Charleston in containers. They've just completed their agreements and will have physically completed their first roll-on, roll-off operation. You already have this at Port Freeport. You handle everything GM that's a truck or an SUV. You guys do it to all of Saudi Arabia, the Middle East. You already have this all figured out. Mobile is just figuring this out to support Toyota and Mazda with their new plant that's under construction in Huntsville, Alabama. They've got their dredging underway. They've got their funding. They passed a Rebuild Alabama logistics bill where they raised the gas tax, and the first recipient of that is the Port of Mobile to beef it up. They're starting to figure out that inland port model works and how to create an inland port. You guys are so far ahead with Port Freeport. You've got to get the railroads on one page. Rosenberg, all the things that you've got there. You guys could be a 5 million container a year port in 3 years if you really supported it properly. So I just can't say enough. The other thing that's going to happen in logistics is, believe it or not, that lower left side, half of everything we do in warehousing, logistics, and e-commerce fulfillment is done manually today. That's all going to get completely automated, so we don't have to worry about warehouse workers having COVID or the flu. And so we're going to see a mass CapEx investment in the insides of warehousing and the technology and robotics and everything else there. Here's a couple of, I guess I'm going to give you 5 good things. This is the 5th one. So these are 2, I follow the transportation metrics. So one of the key ones that we learned about was this concept that we learned about in the freight recovery, where they basically have slots, blanking, unblanking of container slots. So where shipper doesn't show up or manufacturer didn't put their containers on, how do you rebalance ship? How do you put a blank one in there and send it over? We're seeing that change. And the key Shanghai to LA route, we just saw 47% increase in shipping rates in June. That means there's demand. And so again, for Port Freeport, this is your opportunity on here. So that's increasing. You know, I'm a fan of real-time indicators. So the April and May numbers were the worst ever, but they're starting to come back. And so this is the June data that shows what happened. And so this is what I call a transportation metric actually moving in the right direction. It's telling us supply chains moving, things are being manufactured around the world, they're coming in here. Total car loads, we saw the biggest increase in June since we've seen since March. And if you look at from the most since November 2019 in terms of intermodal. So think June just had more containers come in than November, December, or January of this past year. That's absolutely incredible. So this is a great one to follow. Rails are very important. I think you've got, Jeff, was it 3 Class 1 railroads that could connect to? We've got 5 in Mobile. We still can't get them all to play together, but we're working on it. But if we can have a come to Jesus meeting, I'll be glad to help, play Jesus and get them to come together. All right, I'm going to close on this, and this is where maybe I show that maybe my leaning. I'm leaning towards capitalism. How about that? I call it the big market disruption. There is no market without the Fed right now. And look at the stock market in the record gains. I got my retirement statement, my 401k or whatever, the other day from the last several years, all rolled over and consolidated. It was up 38% in the last quarter period it reported. I'm going, what? We have the worst recession ever, and all my stocks went up 38%. I'm definitely going, into the cash by the end of this week, Jeff. But here's what's going on. The Fed is buying anything where there's not price discovery, and they're intervening in ways. They're picking the winners and losers. And I remind all of you that the Fed has 2 mandates, and now they're adding a third. Their 2 mandates are price stability and maximum employment. The third one is setting all market prices. They've even been buying Berkshire Hathaway bonds, Apple bonds, Walmart bonds. Really? How many in the call really think, you can leave your hands down, I'll guess that all of your hands went up. How many really think that the Fed needs to be buying Berkshire Hathaway bonds to support them, or Apple or Walmart or Home Depot? It's absolutely absurd, and the Fed is determining the winners and losers, and there's no governors on it, like a bowling alley. And we really need the Fed brought under control. They were great about lowering interest rates. They were great about getting intervention before Congress could get the CARES bill. But the Fed should not be determining market prices and the winners and losers in this economy. And so if they continue, my recommendation I shared with Jeff is we had Brexit in Europe that caught everybody by surprise. And I think what we will have after the elections, if this continues, is what I'm promoting is called Flexit. And it's where Florida and Texas that have sucked all of the assets and the net worth and the people out of the rest of the world, and you have great assets and very little debt, and you're fiscally well managed. You just exit and create your own damn country. So Flexit is going to be the movement after the November elections if it all goes to hell. So here's again more of the Fed. They're buying up to 750 companies. They're buying ETFs. They're buying student loan debt. It's absolutely ridiculous what's going on, and many people just don't understand what's going on with the Fed. Here's their intervention. So in the 2009 crisis, the Fed got the balance sheet up to about 4.3 trillion by 2015, 2017, and we worked it down this year, the beginning of this year, to under 4 trillion. And the Fed has exploded that to over 7.6 trillion. They told us at their last FOMC meeting, we have another one coming up next week, that there won't be one in August, so that's a safe time to go on vacation, that they're taking their balance sheet to over $10 trillion by September. And they may take that to $20 trillion by the first quarter next year. Now, let's put those numbers in perspective. $10 trillion is almost a half a year of US GDP, and we're the largest economy in the world. The Fed doesn't manufacture or sell anything to get the money to buy assets on its balance sheet. It calls Treasury, and they say print money. We're exploding the money supply. The M2 is up 20% since January. And so this is the currency inflation seed that's being planted and germinated that comes back to bite us in the butt 2-3 years down the road. I put the link. You can go on and look at the Fed's balance sheet. Look at the securities. The Fed now has over $6 trillion in securities on its balance sheet. Really? All right. Here's where the rubber hits the road and where the Fed should be intervening. I mentioned earlier in the college towns with student housing, the 138 that we're looking at facing municipal bankruptcy. We've already had our first Chapter 9 municipal bankruptcy in COVID. It was a exurb of Birmingham, Alabama, Fairfield, that went bankrupt. This is a stratification from the Tax Foundation that shows each state's funding and solvency with regards to unemployment insurance. So the blue bars that start at the top, Vermont has the most. If you have more than a year of unemployment insurance saved, you're considered solvent. So there's the vertical black line, and the horizontal one shows where you go below a year. And so you can see Florida is right at the cusp. The reason Florida is above it is because Florida didn't know how to process an unemployment insurance claim. It's a total cluster with their software. If they can't file unemployment insurance, I don't know how they're going to do voting machines this fall. It scares the hell out of me. Forget hanging chads. We may have some other problem. But look at Texas down there. You guys are just above New York, California in terms of your unemployment insurance solvency. And I think, here's my theory, Jeff. Texas just does, it's like New Zealand. You don't have unemployed. You just have employed people. So why save for it? Because you have a big economy, you keep everybody employed, you create jobs. Why do we need to worry about it? But this is a real concern. And I'm worried we're going to see a lot more municipal bankruptcies. And the reason we open states early. So when people want to demagogue the politics of reopening early, a lot of states didn't have the unemployment insurance fund built up. Many had to borrow from the federal government during the financial crisis, and they only got those funds repaid about 2 years ago. So they haven't had a long time to build them back up. And so the states didn't want to go into debt. And so the economic tentacles of shutting everything down, we'd all love to stay at home and party and not get sick for a year. There's nothing to come back to. So I don't cite or criticize governors or city leaders for reopening. It's just, we got to figure out how to survive with this thing, and whether it's behavior practices like wearing masks and whatnot. But I don't think that we can shut this thing down again at all. So here's a piece I'll give you. So the counselors of real estate, I'm a counselor of real estate. Each year we do a top 10 real estate issues. This year, again, I was on the committee and I wrote the one on public and private debt. And here's the piece, and the bullet points there really tie into the conclusions if you look at the latest debt clock, and they'll scare the bejesus out of you. And so this is where I say we have currency devaluation. We're ruining the dollar. The Fed's out of control. Our debt numbers are absolutely ridiculous. So if you really don't want to sleep tonight or sometime over the weekend, read this piece. It'll scare the bejesus out of you. But it's the reality. It's the true story. We just published it. So I'm now ready to wrap up. When we do get there, when we get a vaccine and we figure out, we're just gonna have COVID parties and everybody get it and be over with it, we need to ask, what is there going to be like? So here's a couple that I like from Visual Capitalists. On the left there is Zoom compared to the airline industry. A year ago, Zoom was this eclectic tech company that had a very small market capitalization. Today, Zoom's market capitalization is greater than the 7 largest airlines in the world with 1% the workforce. So what is an economy with 1% the workforce, not needing all these assets where we can work at home and we don't need to travel, we don't need hotels, and we don't need convention centers? What in the world are we going to come back to? And we need to be thinking through those questions now. And as city and economic and political leaders, this is a tough dialogue you need to be happening right now. You're fortunate. Southwest, as you see it at the top there, it's going to be one of the leaders. I think Southwest, Delta, Lufthansa has already been taken over by the German government. They had to give them 20% of the company. They had to give them a veto power on their board of directors. Do you think that Delta and Southwest and United are going to give that control to the federal government? I'll bet you any amount of Bitcoin they won't. The middle one there is the fast food industry. And I look at this because you generate a lot of sales tax from them. They use a lot of commercial real estate. So before COVID, Chick-fil-A was in the process of redeveloping about half of its existing stores. They were tearing the old ones down. They were moving the restaurant from the center of the pad to the back. And they were adding more drive-through, 3-4 lanes. They were just massively increasing their capacity because they developed a really good app that worked, unlike the McDonald's self-service kiosks. And they were seeing just incredible response to it. Those stores that were completed and opened with the new drive-through, and they also had 2 kitchens. So one kitchen was just for the online app order, so they didn't screw the order up. So 2 kitchens, 3 to 5 drive-through lanes. They can process in 10 minutes over 100 customers in drive-through now, these models. They saw same-store sales go up 10 to 20%. There's not another fast food or casual dining restaurant that can claim anything close to that. So what's the future of a Taco Bell on a half-acre site with 1 bad drive-through lane that can't handle but 10 customers every 10 minutes? What's a McDonald's with a self-service kiosk where nobody wants to go in and touch it, and no drive-through, or only 2 windows that drive-through with the same lane? We're going to have to be thinking about what this is like. And I think Chick-fil-A really highlights that there is going to be a new norm or a new future. in casual dining, and that's going to affect very important revenues at the city and local government level. So, now ready to wrap up. I don't think we have a Nike swoosh review, recession recovery. We have a W. I wrote a piece on that today you can access. I pray to God if we don't get this right or the elections go really bizarre, we could end up with a U. If the Democrats regain control of the Senate and take the White House, I'm moving to New Zealand. I'll just tell you, Jeff, I've already got my application in. I'm doing my paperwork. I just think where we would head, no police, no law and order. I just think the policies are totally anti-capitalism. And we're really dependent on states like Texas to really restore and bring back the sanity on some of this type stuff. So unfortunately, Trump isn't the best messenger. I believe, great on a lot of his policies and things that he's done in supporting capitalism, but man, he sure can't do a message that resonates with particularly suburban women out there. So you couldn't craft a worse kind of PR campaign for re-election than probably what he's got running. But I really worry our future. You always hear this is the most important election. We at least need to have some sort of checks and balance in our government system. And so if the Senate can't hold, or we get some balance here and we lose all three branches, I think even because the court system will go as well. Look at how important the court appointments have been to getting back to the Constitution, rule of law, not making stuff up. So I probably revealed I'm a capitalist on this one. So that's my take there. I'll conclude this way. So I'm doing a lot of history reading. I probably can't claim that I read Winston Churchill anymore because it's probably politically incorrect. Every historical figure is politically incorrect anymore. But he had a great quote near the end of his career. And he basically learned, don't trust what people say anymore. And he said, I no longer listen to what people say. I just watch what they do. Behavior never lies. That's why I watch corporate earnings. The corporate earnings here, second quarter, are going to tell us what's going to play out in the second half of the year without corona virus under control, without a vaccine, with this thing continuing. So here's how I believe a picture is worth 1,000 words. I'm giving you two here. On the left there, some birthday card I found. Forecasting the economy and assessing the impact on CRE values during COVID-19 may be a little messy. It's like giving a kid in the high chair the birthday cake and say, go at it. And the other one I would say is, look, there is so much we can do to have the economy open. And I'm not one that wants to wear a face mask and be told what to do and where to stand in an elevator. But you know what? I'm willing to do that and wear my mask and follow social distancing to basically not shut down the economy and save this thing for something else. So I'm a car guy. Here's the old 1960 VW bus vans that went to Woodstock. They've all been restored. The baby boomers now are much more, they're not going to be in the mud. They're going to park on nice grassed areas. They got their camper tops, but they're all spaced 6 feet apart. We all just need to suck it up and do our parts on social distancing and whatever we can do to keep the economy open, because if not, the alternative really isn't very pretty. So I'll stop there, Jeff, and see if anybody wants to tell me I'm crazy. I know I am.
Well, thanks, Casey. I think it was a information-packed session. We went a little bit longer than our normal meeting, and I don't want to keep those that have to go, but this is a rare opportunity to ask your questions, and I want to give that opportunity to our folks. We've got a couple questions that came in on chat. For Richard Stolice, yeah, we're going to make this presentation and the recording of this available. It'll take us about a day to get it all put together and put on our website, but it should be up there by tomorrow, Rochelle tells me. Jason asked, is hyperinflation being laundered through the NASDAQ right now?
Yeah, the stock market, particularly the NASDAQ, you just got to wonder that they're willing to pay these prices because they're really trying to look down the road and what's going to have revenue or what's going to pay a dividend. And I think that's why commercial real estate, and particularly some of the REITs, the industrial REITs. So at Monmouth, our REIT, we're paying a 4% dividend. We have net leased assets on 15-year lease terms. It's all about the hunt for yield. And they're making the bet the NASDAQ is technology rich. These are the technology companies, whether it's a Zoom or whatever, that are going to have the technology where that's where we're going to have revenue. That's where we're going to have business models as opposed to old industry like airlines. And so I think that is a very observation in that really, the NASDAQ is reflecting we've accelerated moving to an even more tech economy by probably 5 years through COVID. And they're betting that whatever the insane price is right now, I don't care about the Fed and all this other stuff. They're giving me free money to buy it. I can buy a margin. I can borrow money against anything I want. A friend that just got a 2.58% mortgage on their house and took the money out of it all paid off, and they put 2/3 of it into the NASDAQ stocks in the market. So I think that's a very astute observation. It's betting that the future is more of a technology-rich environment on companies that are going to have the right business model that can pay a dividend that will go up in value and that get out of cash and get out of the dollar and get out of the old industry. So I think you've got a very valid point there.
Can you talk a little bit about the loan transfer to special services pieces and what's going on with the banks right now? Are we going back into a period where the banks are retrenching and not going to be loaning money?
I'm very worried about it, especially at the bank stress test, because think of what the Fed did on the bank stress test. They told the banks you can't buy your stock back and you can't pay a dividend. Okay, so how do I attract capital? How do I attract investors when they don't know when or how much of a dividend I'm going to pay? You basically just said you're screwed. We've nationalized the banks. And the banks, when you look at what they're adding to their reserves, even JP Morgan's numbers were mind-boggling. It was almost like another $1 billion that they added to their loan loss reserves. So they're seeing down the road, if I have consumer business like Bank of America and credit cards, and they brought that down a lot. We got Truist Bank coming up, the SunTrust BB&T merger. A lot of consumer. BB&T was really an oversized, a biggie-sized community bank that did a lot of hotel lending and a lot of C&I small business lending. They have big problems ahead of themselves, billions and billions of dollars. And when you look at a bank saying, I got a tier 1 capital, a 10 tier 1 capital ratio, that's nothing to protect you. If you're looking at, if you invested in a lot of hotels, if you did a lot of C&I loans in restaurants and hotels, you're screwed. You'd need a 20 or 30% tier 1 capital ratio to keep you capitalized. So I think what the Fed's doing is they're saying, look at guys, we want you to do PPP. And the banks, remember when they did those loans, they still have to reserve capital against them. They own them. They have to manage them. So they're not going to get criticized for having made them, but they're going to have to pay capital consequences for those loans. They got to have staff resources to manage those loans. So the banks are paralyzed. The Fed, on one hand, the Fed is saying, we'll intervene and buy anything that doesn't have a price, and we want the economy to move forward, but we're going to lock up the banks. And I've already had probably 24 calls from major developers with a number of projects going that have said they had deals literally to close this month or the end of this month, where the bank called them back and said, there's been a change in the bank and we're backing out. We're not going to close the deal. And they said, well, what's wrong? Nothing changed on the credit, nothing changed on the lease, none of the metrics, appraisal, none of those things changed. And they basically said the chief risk and credit officer of the bank just said, we're kind of in lockdown mode, we need to preserve capital. And I think one of the consequences we're going to hear out of this from the bank stress test is the bank saying, we're afraid to make a loan because we don't know what's coming at us with these bad loans that are coming, and why would we make a new loan? So the other thing I think that's going on here is we're going to see it play out differently in the banks. So in prior recessions, we've seen the banks go through the process of transfer the loan in the bank that, that they work out, or special assets department, the LTSS equivalent from permanent CMBS world. Then if we can't work it out, we'll foreclose and then we'll liquidate the asset. And it takes 1 to 2 years to do that. It's not going to happen this time. You know what the banks are already doing? They're proactively pooling what they think are all the bad loans, all the bad hotel loans, all the bad restaurant loans, and they're doing debt sales. So if they can get anywhere from 40 to 50 cents on the dollar, they're willing to bundle those and sell them now to private equity, sovereign wealth. Look at what Saudi Arabia did with Carnival Cruise Lines. They just bought a huge stake betting on the cruise ship industry. And everybody that had debt and everything else in that sold that to the Saudi government. So we're not going to see the banks go through this. We're going to see a really steep decline in their capital ratios. They're throwing everything they can in terms of reserves, and it's not going to be enough. So I think we're going to see more banks fail in this crisis in a quicker period of time than we saw post 2009. We lost over 500 banks, and we saw about another 1,500 consolidate as a result from the 2009 financial crisis, really over about a 4-year period. We're going to see more than that over a 24-month period. And so go start watching the FDIC's website on bank reporting and the stress tests and all of those, ratios that they give on the banks. And I think by year end, we start to see bank failures again. But the banks are going to bundle the loans into debt. They're going to sell them at deep discounts, and they're not going to go through the process with people, time, or a slow bleed. They're going to dump this stuff and just hope they can make it to the other end. I think the Fed is going to end up by this time next year having to do a decision that's much like what they had to do with TARP. The banks will no longer be well capitalized. They'll no longer have 10 or better tier 1 capital ratios. The discovery and C&I loans, real estate loans, all this types of municipal bond debt that's in distress. All this is going to come to discovery, especially when we pull back, rent forbearance programs by FHFA, PPP loans, unemployment insurance extend. All that's got to pull back by next year. We just don't have enough money to keep doing it. And when that does, and we see the economy can't stand on its own and we still have a 10% unemployment rate, I think you're going to see the banks have capital ratios that get down in the mid-single digits. And the Fed's going to have to make the decision, which was what we should have done in 2009. Just let the banks operate at a 2 or 3 or 4% capital ratio and give them 2 years to work through their problems and rebuild capital. And if they do it, great. If not, then you take them over. But I think the Fed's going to be tempted to do another TARP program and put capital in the banks. And I think that's the wrong move. I want to compliment the community banks. The community banks have been the one infrastructure that have continued to lend, that they did PPP loans. There's one community bank in Tampa, Florida that did more PPP loans. It's under $1 billion bank than Bank of America and Wells Fargo combined. That's atrocious. And when you look at what's come out on these PPP loans, the big bad bank behavior was worse we've ever seen. And that's not being distinguished or segregated from the community banks. And so you guys went through like what Colorado did. You lost your big banks. But you rebuilt a great infrastructure. Really think those relationships in community banks. They need the deposits. They need the relationship. They are the one infrastructure continuing to lend. The other one I'll tell you about is the credit unions. We actually, believe it or not, have more credit unions than we do banks in this country, and they're continuing to lend and do good stuff. So I want to compliment the community banks. They really have stepped up in this crisis.
Yeah, I'll say that too. Through the PPP process, and you recognize that Texas did pretty well and Houston also, but our community banks were spectacular. I mean, they were the ones that you went to. If you had an account with some of the big banks, and we all know what the big C bank is and some of the other Bank of America, those guys went to them. We had small businesses that went for PPP and never got a chance at it. I mean, they weren't processing. Maybe the big guys with those banks got handled, but not the little guys. And the little guys went through the PPP with the community banks and they got handled. So we had one more question. We'll talk because we have another conference call, I know, for our company starting at 9:30. But what advice do you have, KC, regarding priorities for pursuing manufacturing, reshoring opportunities as businesses presumably come back because of the China issues? Do you see those opportunities coming to the U.S.?
So I see fewer for the U.S. and more for Mexico. The ones coming to the U.S. are going to be in pro-business states like a Texas that are particularly on the border and that have the logistics infrastructure, that have the rail, that have the port. That's why I can't underestimate. We've talked about Port Freeport for years, and I would say right now it is even more important and more of a priority that everybody in Texas needs to wrap their brain around. It's critical to the Dallas economy. Port Freeport has the potential to be the equivalent of what Savannah is to Atlanta in terms of its support for Dallas. Look at, at Kansas City Southern, the inland ports and Kansas City Southern coming down into all the Mexico ports. So I think you're in position, you in Arizona are in really strategic positions. It's really in the southeast states that are pro-business, where you can, in Georgia and Alabama and Tennessee and Texas, where you can get stuff done and you can bring it. And look at where, the logistics infrastructure, where did Walmart go? They picked Portomobile. Where did the automobile manufacturing, all the new automobile manufacturing are in the South. All the auto components come out of Mexico into the Southeast. We're going to see the same things happen with every element, whether it's appliances, PPP equipment. I think the opportunities are really big. You may be downstreaming the component manufacturing into Mexico and doing more of the value add assembly in Texas. So I think it's huge. Pay attention to that, but really beef up your relationships and partnerships in Mexico, because man, they're doing more business development and getting it in there. And so I think that's the opportunity. You, Arizona, and the few Southeast states are the big winners.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up. Rochelle, you're telling me that we'll have this on our website, the slides and the recording tomorrow?
We may have it today, but for sure by tomorrow. It takes about 12 hours for the video to render.
Okay. You have any announcements about our future meetings?
Yes, I do.
Did I depress everybody? No meetings.
No, it was great information. We have Dr. Kleinberg next month for August. And then just a reminder that in October, our meeting will be the fourth Thursday in conjunction with the Chamber's Infrastructure Conference. I think that's the 29th. And that will be, at this point, if Kristen and Carrie are still on here, they can correct me if I'm wrong. I think at that point that is in person.
Okay. Well, thanks for attending the meeting. Casey, thanks for spending the time to do this presentation for us, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
Yep.
Maybe
If there's
I can
anything else
get you.
I can do for you, or if you want at the end of September, early October, do an earnings recap. We could focus it on Texas companies or overall and what were the nuggets. I'll do them complimentary for you guys.
Great. When it's safe to travel, I think I need to get you out here and talk to Dan Patrick or somebody in our state government that we can access locally here, and really emphasize that. It's hard to get the railroads to cooperate. And when you have a monopoly position, which one of the railroads does in Port Freeport, it's a monopoly position by a monopoly provider is hard to get them to move, to open up. But we need to be able to build a case that shows that everybody is better off because of it. And until we get at least 2 tier 1 providers offering service down there, I think it's going to be hard to address. But we need to get state leadership to really come in and see the opportunity. And without a Greg Abbott basically bringing those railroads to the table, it's going to be tough to do. So maybe we'll get you as a consultant to go up there and help us make that case.
Glad to help. Well, this new paper, Logistics 2.0, it'll have your business case. And believe me, I will have, Savannah, Charleston, and Mobile right now are your examples of what results. And that's the opportunity if you get the pieces together in Freeport. It is probably one of the things. If somebody said, do one thing in Texas, one thing that would have the biggest economic impact and the biggest return on investment, it would be follow through on the railroad with Port Freeport. Biggest thing. Everybody benefits statewide.
All right, guys. Thanks. We'll see you next month. Take care.
Stay safe. Be healthy.